My name is Joshua Gibson, and you are listening to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, a show dedicated to promoting a message of critical thinking as it pertains to strength training, nutrition, and well-being. This is done through interviews with experts, high-level athletes, coaches, and people heavily involved in strength sports and athletic development. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and let's get on to today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson. I'm joined today by the one and only Mr. Mike Israetel. How's it going, Mike?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. I think, it was probably, 5 years ago we recorded a podcast, and I doubt it's on your radar just because it's kind of a blip in time, but roughly 5 years ago we recorded a podcast. It was like episode 10 of this show, and it was like, wildly popular, the most popular episode. And I put the thumbnail was you with your shirt off, and people absolutely gawked over that and loved it. And I think that actually gained more attention for the podcast than the actual show itself. So I don't know what that says about your physique, but it has this weird ability to attract men.
Oh, it's not weird. It's all a plan, sir. All to plan.
Yeah, and it was a great conversation, and I kind of mentioned this in our little email exchange, that you're really the reason why I ended up looking at ETSU as a school for like a graduate program, and then I ended up getting my master's degree through ETSU, and then by the nature of who tends to come from that program, particularly the sport physiology program, ended up getting into a PhD program, and my advisor is Dr. Guy Hornsby, who spent all of his undergrad and graduate education at ETSU studying under Doc Stone and the faculty there. So I think it's really cool that you were able to have that influence on me kind of from the start. So I really appreciate it. I don't know what I would be doing if I wasn't kind of where I am now. So major thanks for that.
Well, it was my pleasure to whatever extent I had an influence. I hope it was good.
Yeah. And that's kind of an update for the show in the sense of like why this episode makes sense. Where are you at in kind of everything that you're doing? I know sometimes it's hard to keep up when there are fast developments and pretty extreme developments. So what's going on in your life, I guess, professionally at the moment?
Well, I just started another semester of teaching my one online class per year at Lehman College in the master's program for strength and conditioning. And that's going very well. The students seem to be more excited every year, I guess, or more folks that sign up for the class seem to know what they're getting into. And then I am working at Renaissance Periodization, and we've got the Diet Coach app is doing very well, and the new hypertrophy training app is launched basically in May/June, depending on how you count a soft launch versus hard launch to beta, launch to public, blah, blah, blah. Basically just a few months ago it launched. It's been doing great. I use it in my training all the time. Lots of folks use it. And so that's taken up quite a bit of time to make sure that we're shepherding those apps well. And then also at RP, we've been doing a lot of YouTubing lately. So the Renaissance Periodization YouTube is kind of blowing up, which is cool. And I've had an opportunity to do a lot of different kinds of videos and continuing to do some sort of, I intend to do an educational bit on YouTube, but it comes off as half education and half dog shit comedy that nobody likes. But that's kind of how that's going. And so the YouTube is gaining ground and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I mentioned to someone that you were in academia and you taught, and then you kind of made the jump to, I wouldn't want to mischaracterize it, but I would say working with Renaissance Periodization full time. What was your, and I guess you just mentioned teaching a class, and particularly with the graduate program, but what was that kind of like time course like where you got into, I guess you ended up getting your PhD, you got into teaching. What was your experience like doing that? And then what was the reasoning or what was the rationale for getting out of it? And then kind of reflecting back on those choices, how do you feel about all of it?
Yeah. So I was, we had a company, the Renaissance Periodization was already a company by the time that I was about 2/3 of the way through my graduate studies. So, or my PhD at ETSU. And so basically, I was already working part time for RP as a coach, as someone who's writing books, etc., articles, yada yada. I was already doing that um, halfway through the PhD, or 2/3 of the way through the PhD program for sure. So not only did that mean I split time between my RP duties and my PhD finishing duties, but also that I was drawing an income already from my RP duties. And as you know, you don't really draw an income from your PhD work. So it's mostly just enough money to keep you alive and coming back to school. So once that was coming to a close, I remember that Doc Stone, my advisor and major professor, he was and is quite a nervous man, and so he was very nervous and worried that all of us first graduating class, of which Dr. Guy Hornsby is your mentor and supervisor, and he was in that class with me. And he, Doc Stone thought that we're all never going to get jobs, or it's going to be very hard to get jobs because we're in a very, very unique situation where we're America's first sports science PhDs. So maybe it wouldn't sit well with hiring committees. So one of my friends, Chris McDonald, who also graduated from the program, him and I started applying for schools early for professor jobs. And I mean, Mackey got at me at like mid-August of that year, and he was like, "We got to start applying, or we won't have any jobs." And Doc Stone's like, "That's right, no one's gonna hire you." And we're like, "Oh shit!" So I must have applied to like 30 jobs or something like that.
Wow.
And yeah, the way it happens is like they don't really get back to you until much later. And so I took the first interview opportunities, and one of the schools, which was the University of Central Missouri, they really got ahead of the pack. It was real smart on their behalf. And Dr. Mike Goddard, who has since actually much later on began to work for RP in a consulting capacity, he was the department head, and he was like, I think if we get this whole professor search thing done earlier, a lot of folks that would have waited for a while to compare jobs, if we give a compelling offer early, a few of them might actually take the compelling offer. I think that might have been logic, or he just like wants to get done with stuff early. So what ends up happening at academia, for any of you folks listening that are curious that are going to go down this route, is a lot of the jobs you'll get in your first year after your PhD and your master's program, whatever it is you're graduating from, some of them are posted very early. Some of them are posted. Some of the jobs were actually posted in late August and even late July. So, like the various like Chronicles of Higher Ed and various other portals you have where serious job postings occur. But then it doesn't stop, and the job postings incrementally increase in frequency all the way through that fall semester and even into the spring or winter semester or whatever the hell you call it. And so I didn't know that, and neither did my colleagues. And so we just put out a crap ton of applications in that first kind of few months. And then we started getting contacted by departments, called back, invited for interviews and all this other stuff. And really, as soon as University of Central Missouri, I went there for an interview. I liked it a lot. And it was one of these things where it's okay, I don't have a job. Dr. Mike Stone, my supervisor, says I might not get a job. This is a great job. There are other jobs on my list that also look really cool, but I'm not exactly going to wait around for those if the University of Central Missouri makes me a compelling offer. And they did early, like I think before Thanksgiving or something like that. And I was like, yes, I'll take it. And that was that. That's how I got my first professor job. And then a few weeks later, I started getting phone calls and emails from a ton of other programs. They're like, hey, we'd love to have you out for an interview. And I was like, oh, I already got hired, but thank you so much. So I just
Yeah.
had no idea that was coming. And it's not like I made a bad decision. It turned out to be a great decision. But it was kind of interesting how I entered the professorship in this attitude of scarcity of like, you had better get a job or else you're going to be homeless and alone on the street. So, I think it's a terrible thing that Dr. Mike Stone kind of pushed us in that direction because look, it's like a little bit better, marginally better for you to kind of overdo the search and definitely find a job than for you to underdo the search and kind of in March be like, I think this one school might call me back, and I don't really know what I'm doing now. The reality is this, like, you can get a job teaching somewhere kind of all the way through the academic year because, like, yes, late August is when a lot of these positions come up. Late August, September, October, November is when they start posting a ton of these because they're trying to fill it for the next fall. Because, there's a lot of like, first of all, as a department chair who has to hire people for positions, you want to get the shit over with. Like, you want to
Right.
have people slotted in to show up. You don't want to have classes listed on. So, for example, you're able to sign up in most universities for fall classes the spring semester before, or winter, whatever you call it, which really just means like in January of the year that, before basically that you're going to be offering classes, people are allowed to sign up for them. Like, if you don't have a professor for the classes you're offering, it's a little scary as a department chair. You know what I mean? It's like having friends come over your house, but you haven't bought any food yet. And you're like, when are they coming? 2 hours? Uh-oh. Like, oh, better get on it. As if people show up, there's no food, there's going to be a problem. And if students show up and there's no professor teaching the course, there's going to be a problem. So a lot of times professors get out there early, but there are a lot of situations where people are slated to come, they're supposed to come, or they've been working at the school for some time. They get another job, they retire, they don't show up as promised, they take another job instead. And then what you end up having is all the way through that springtime, March, April, May, June, even July, you'll have job postings come up that are like, hey, like, we need a professor to teach Anat and Phys in the fall. Like, yes, in 3 months. Please, for the love of God, email us back. Is there's nobody to do this? And at that point, so it's not, obviously Dr. Stone very much got the whole thing. I don't want to degrade his validity here. He's a worrier, and he over prepared us and then over worried for us. It turns out we were all, because we had experience in the classroom teaching, we had experience learning, we had excellent dissertations, and we had opportunity to work with teams and professional sports and all those other crazy things most people don't get to. Turns out all of us got jobs no problem, and we were all really, like, really good candidates. But if he was mistaken somehow, there would have been other times of the year for which to get hired. So I didn't know any of that. So, sorry to make a long story short, I was like, okay, I got to get a job. First good job I got offered, I just took it. And then I stayed at the University of Central Missouri for, I think, 2 years. It was an incredible formative opportunity for me. I met a bunch of people who were super important to me in my life and had big influences on me. And all this time, RP is growing. And then I ended up going to Temple University a little while later to work with my friend and colleague, Dr. James Hoffman, because he was already at Temple. He was a graduate from ETSU 1 year later than me. He had been in Temple for 1 year, and I was like, hey, like, I want to come live and work and be friends with you in Philadelphia, and Temple seems like a great place. And he's like, yeah, indeed it does. So I applied for that because he told me they had a job opening there. I applied, I got that job. I worked at Temple for 2 years, and I remember during the end of one of those years, during the end of that, or middle of that last year that I worked at Temple, middle of the last year, so I worked there 2 years. After the third semester that I worked there, if you don't count summers, 2 semesters a year, I had an opportunity to go and relax a little bit and enjoy some winter vacation, but I also did some RP work. And because I had a few weeks free on winter vacation, I ended up doing like an unbelievable amount of work for RP that generated like a considerable amount of value. And I realized that what had been preventing me from generating that much value before is the fact that I was busy full time at Temple teaching students and doing all this other stuff. And so I called a few friends, a few coworkers, my colleague slash boss, CEO of RP, Mr. Nick Shaw. I talked to him. I talked to Lori Shaw, his wife, and then our chief financial person. And I was like, should I keep being a professor? Because here's what happened this past 2 weeks. I managed to make us an unbelievable amount of money because I had free time. And they were both like, you don't need to be a professor anymore. This is absurd. And so I left the professorship a semester later. So did Dr. James Hoffman. And then all hunky dory, everything's going well. I'm doing full time RP. And then about 2 years later, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld reached out and said, "Hey, I'm starting a PhD, a master's program in exercise and sports science. I would love for you to teach a course. Can you do that?" And I'm not going to let Brad down, so I said yes. And because my course commitment to that program is very minimal, and because I really like interacting with graduate students, it just turned out to be a really cool thing. So now I still get to say I'm a professor. And I still am, but the vast majority of my work is for RP.
Hey, what's up, weightlifters? Danny here, founder of Onyx Weightlifting Co., a leather accessories company specializing in weightlifting gear. In our shop, we make gear that doesn't get in the way of your performance because we understand that hitting lifts requires your full attention. Our straps, wrist wraps, and belts are designed to be comfortable and reliable, so all you need to do is make lifts. Thanks for listening to our friend Josh's podcast. You can continue to support him by visiting our online shop at onyxstraps.com and using his code PHILWL. That's PHILWL at checkout. See you on the platform.
And I would be curious to hear your perspective or your uh, thoughts on your time teaching and kind of what that meant to you. And, if the whole Renaissance periodization situation hadn't panned out like that, do you think you would still be teaching full time, or you would be trying to, I don't know, become a program coordinator? Like, what are your
Oh
thoughts
God,
on
no.
teaching, and
Oh,
where do you think you
oh
would be with
boy.
that?
Yeah, great question. So I love teaching. Almost every minute of teaching is awesome. I have a natural inclination to want to teach. And so to me, I would, if RP just never happened, so by the way, I never planned on RP happening. So I do have a plan of RP not happening. It was my original plan. I was just going to teach full time at probably a small liberal arts university. And because I didn't want to do like bench research. I didn't want to be involved in the research process outside of an analytical level or like data analysis or hypothesis generation or discussion. I didn't want to actually be in the lab and like doing actual like, hey, like you do 10 reps to failure and then we write down the reps. Like I've done a lot of that and I didn't want to do it. I didn't think it was a marginally good or marginally enjoyable use of my time compared to actually lecturing. So I was going to do that. And the universities which I worked for, I had essentially almost exclusively lecturing positions. So it was really good already. I was in that role. And then what I would have done is just like coach some people on the side to make some extra money. And I would have had a great life. And that was the plan. So I would just have, I would have taught, at the university for a long time. Interestingly enough, I still teach. It's just that I do almost all of my teaching through YouTube and through podcasts. So my ability to get up on stage and ramble about some stupid shit until someone pulls me off with a cane, it's high up there. And so teaching is just a way for me to ramble around. And so I would have loved to still been teaching if the opportunity presented by RP wasn't, some several orders magnitude more impactful for me personally, as far as I could see it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even for myself, kind of thinking about where I want to go after this, after the program, and what I'll be prepared for and what I've done, I kind of feel like I'm in similar shoes, to you, maybe just slightly bigger and slightly wider, given the size of my feet.
Yes, I have
But
tiny feet. This is well known.
but I really enjoy teaching, as evidenced by the podcast and all the content that creation stuff that I do. Um, so I'm kind of planning to go into more of a lecturing role and just kind of do the same thing. And, I don't know if that's going to work out the way I think it will, but what you said kind of hits home for me as well. What do you think? And maybe this is something you cultivated, maybe it's something that's more innate, but how do you feel you were able to develop the ability to be so prolific with your time, given that You mentioned getting a bit of time off. You did work for Renaissance. You were prolific enough during that period to generate enough money to make it worthwhile. And then you've kind of been and continued to be prolific. How have you developed, the abilities and skill set to exploit the actual information that you know and to turn it into content rather than just sitting on it and knowing it and being able to talk about it in conversation?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, this is the philosophical weightlifting podcast, so I suppose I get rather philosophical. I have two perspectives on this. One is a personal perspective, and one is a more empirical and theoretical perspective. Theoretically, a person's ability to have a high work throughput is probably majority genetic. So it's just, if I was to give you some kind of make-believe just so story about how inspired I was or how I have all these cool habits, I'd be missing a large fraction of the story. So just for the fact of being truthful to how reality works, I'm genetically inclined for a couple reasons to be productive. One is I'm sufficiently intelligent for the stuff that comes out of my mouth to make more sense than not on average, at least to enough people that I have an audience. To put it another way, enough people want to hear my interpretation of what sports science really looks like for me to be able to have a job and, pay bills. So that's good. But the productivity part of, okay, I'm smart enough to do this, but why do I actually work at it so much? One of them is I have an inability to not be productive for extended periods of time. Like if I'm not producing things of value for, usually a few days, maybe a few weeks. I'm actually on active rest right now, so I'm really trying to stretch it out to see how long I can go with. Well, I take that back. I've been working this entire time. What the fuck am I saying? I'm going to lie to you on your own podcast. I've worked all day so far. I'll be working after we're done. I'm supposed to be active resting. In any case, as evidenced by my workaholism, I have much harder time stopping work than I do starting work. Now, everyone has wake up in the morning with crusty eyes and you're like, look at your to-do list and you're like, ugh, fuck, I got to go to the office. This sucks. But once I'm in there and once I get grooving, it's really a transcendent experience and I would rather be nowhere else. So really, it's like, I love being in my quiet basement office and making PowerPoints. It's one of my favorite things to do. And all the other work I do is in this office. I couldn't love it anymore. And then, so that's a big deal of just, I'm a workaholic. I prefer working to not working. I love my work and I'm smart enough to do it. So all of a sudden, I think we have all the necessary conditions for high proclivity to produce content. It was like, left to my own devices, I will produce content. And I guess another one that I can sort of spitball here is I do not enjoy the idea that lots of people who are well-intentioned, good people, they're trying to get their best results in fitness, not having access to the best information, not having access at least to the information I believe would have a marginal utility for them versus them having never seen it. So for example, someone will ask me a question on Instagram or on in the YouTube comments about a fitness problem they're trying to solve. And what I'll do nowadays is I'll just YouTube search myself. So Mike Israetel, whatever that problem was, let's call it like injury management. And I hit enter. If I already have a video about it, I'm like, hey, sweet. I send it to them. If I don't, I'm like, God damn it. Like, I got to make a video about this so I can have a nice integrated logical approach to whatever this problem is. Now, sometimes there's other videos people make that are very awesome and I'm just not going to try to outdo them. For example, Jeff Nippard has the whole series on how to train your neck. And I'm just like, that's just not in my wheelhouse. So people are like, hey, how do I do neck training? I'm like, let's just Google Jeff Nippard and read everything you see and watch all his videos and you're going to be awesome at having a huge neck. But for a lot of stuff, especially stuff that's close to my passion, hypertrophy training, fatigue management, etc., like, yeah, my take on it would be very useful to many people, I think. It's at least what people say when they watch the videos. And maybe not many, but at least some. So I'm very much driven to put as many of my ideas out into the YouTube podcast ether as possible so that people who search for these things can end up finding them and actually getting helped, and in some small sense at least, to prepare for when AI is doing all of our searching for us instead of us manually Googling, and AI will do not just searching but also understanding. And I want to put as much material out into the ether so that the AI can integrate it into its understanding, so we have to spend less time later being like, oh, actually AI, these recommendations are not that good. There's some nuance you missed. For example, every now and again, every few months, I will ask GPT-4, and I'm a subscriber to OpenAI's GPT. Um, I'll ask it like a question about like exercise and sports science, like, hey, like, can you make me a program that looks like this, or can you, like, what if I want to lose fat and gain muscle? What do I do? And so far, its answers, though incrementally, staggeringly, and frighteningly better, have been lacking. And it's kind of like when I can no longer critique the GPTs, when the AI knows more about training than I do, I can retire. Until then, I have to put out content to at least teach the AIs what to do correctly. Because if you talk to GPT and you're like, here's why you got this wrong, it actually understands and goes, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll change my mind on that. And you're like, oh, thank God somebody told this thing. So, the GPTs are insanely smart, but they also have a problem. They don't live in the real world. They can't try out various training routines. So all they can do is read the internet, right? And find out what other people think. Soon they'll be able to watch YouTube videos. I believe Google's already having it do that. But hopefully it's just, if you have good ideas about how to do things better, especially in today's modern world of the internet, putting them out there is a net public good versus not putting them out there. And I am a little bit driven by that, not because I'm much of an altruist and I think public good is nice, although I do have those warm, fuzzy feelings. But a lot of it is out of a kind of frustration of like, God damn it, why the fuck don't people know this yet? Or frustration at other people who put out content that sucks and is full of lies and is wrong. And then that's even worse because people are like, well, I heard it's this. And you're like, no, it's not that. And you're like, well, can you explain? I'm like, well, yes, let me record a YouTube video and post it. So that's kind of where a lot of my inspiration to work at this kind of stuff comes from.
No, and I think that was a great answer, and I see the show taking like an epistemological bend with one. It sounds like you have an underlying all of this. You have an extreme curiosity to understand and know as much as you can about your interests, and I think for myself that's true. There's just this like deep seated curiosity to understand certain things, and I would say
Oh
for me
yeah.
it's more philosophical or psychological, and then also happens to weirdly be sports science. Um, I Is that something for you that's always existed? Is just this interest to know and understand and continue that cycle of like trying to understand or know, trying to realize like, okay, there's more to it, and then just continually, I guess, refining the questions and the answers.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't thought about this much, but reflecting back on my entire life and childhood, I was always hungry for more information. Whatever it is that interested me, I wanted to learn more about it. So much so that, like, if I'm taking a dump and I don't have now that I have my phone with me, I just read off my phone when I take dumps. But if I'm taking a dump and I don't have anything to read, I'll actually like read the ingredients and the distribution channels on the bar of soap. Like I can't stop reading things. I want to know more about a lot of stuff. One of my recent conundrums of this is not a conundrum. It's a very, very first world problem, but I have so many videos on YouTube on my watch later list that I'll never see them all. There's so many interesting things happening all the time, and so much I want to know about, both in my field and in my hobby, dilettante fields, that I can never catch up. So I'm sometimes I get tired of learning stuff and being curious, but not for long. So usually I want to know more about stuff, and I'm always trying to consume information. And I do have a huge respect for and a love for how do I say this properly, um, order and complexity and effectiveness and organization. It's amazing to me when a society or a system is competent. It knows a lot. Everything is well ordered. There's a plan for everything. And I'm trying to make the world around me a little bit more complex and ordered and functional than not. So if I can, after some decades of working in exercise and sports science, look back and go, with my help, we really did answer some burning questions, and we got people clarity, and we got them from the point of, I have this body and it can do certain things, and I'm like, okay with that, but I want more. But how the hell do I get more? From that point of incrementally more mystery, I would love to have helped the field get to a point of incrementally less mystery, such that someone in 2029 or 2027 is like, I want to get in shape. They talk to their AI or they Google or whatever the hell we'll be doing then, and they're going to be like, oh wow, this is like a pretty solved problem. Like there's very good advice from experts. It's in plain language. There's apps and stuff I can use such that this getting in shape is no longer a mystery. It's one of those things where, like in the 1950s, if you were suffering from clinical depression, I mean, fuck, man, there's not really anything for you. Therapy was basically a completely nascent field. And you just kind of had to swallow it. And maybe you could talk to some, some person of religious repute in your community. And that was no doubt helpful, but nothing very straightforward. Nowadays, if you're suffering from depression, I mean, good God, there's a whole science around it. There are multiple classes, generations, and candidates of drugs, different kinds of therapy. And it's really like if you're depressed in 2023, there's a lot more we understand about that and a lot more we can help you with. So in exercise and sports science, in getting people in the best shape of their lives, I want to be able to help build a world that is less confusing and has more obvious answers. Like, I'm driving on the road, my car's getting out of gas. I see a big, pretty sign for a huge gas station. I go in, I pay money seamlessly with my credit card. I get gas, I leave. Like that kind of, you don't even think about it. Like someone's like, hey, we're in the metropolitan Kansas City area. Like, okay, can you get me gasoline? And be like, this is a joke. Of course. Are you fucking kidding me? You just drive to the gas station. Like that is an example of a very well solved seamless problem. I'd like to get the question of, hey man, I need to lose some fat and gain some muscle and get healthier. Like exactly what it is am I supposed to be doing? I want that to be a seamless problem, to where it's like, oh yeah, no, it's like download the RP apps, watch these 3 YouTube videos, and you're well on your way, or something like that. Maybe something even better than that. But it's just like, I'm from the pre-internet age myself. I remember not having the internet as a child, and like I'm not interested in going back to that. And I want the internet to really mature into maybe one of the things it was supposed to be, which was a place you go to get definite, ultra helpful knowledge to solve your real world problems.
Yeah, and I brought up a quote that I posted on my Facebook a while back, and it's microbiology and meteorology explain things that could have caused a woman to be tortured and burned to death a few centuries ago, and that's by Carl Sagan. So this idea of knowledge being progressive and uh, more and more accurate and more applicable to kind of like our everyday experiences, as per the one you mentioned with clinical depression, I think is super relevant. And we don't have a ton of time, but having those preconditions, what I would think of as, having curiosity and then having this like insatiable interest or desire to work, those are useful insofar as they're appropriately applied. And what I mean by that is you have the correct information coming in, so you can work your ass off. And if you're pointed, imagine you're in some sort of tunnel and you're drilling down to find a fuel source. But if you're pointed in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how hard you work.
Yeah.
On that same end, if you're sick of working and you absolutely despise it, and you're the slowest possible person drilling to find that fuel source, is going to take way longer than it needs to. So
Yeah.
how have you been able to develop this filter of, well, I can get closer to the truth, or what we know is truth? Was that would you contribute some of that? I mean, not some of it, but like how much of getting advanced degrees really helped refine the way you think about problems and solutions?
I don't know. Um, maybe not a ton. I think a lot of that critical thinking practice is something you have to cultivate in your own mind, and something that you have to really think deeply about and get other resources about. I don't know if academia is a really good place to learn how to think critically.
Yeah.
In many segments of it in 2023, it's maybe the last place you want to go to learn critical thinking, because they actively discourage it, and shun you and kick you out of school if you do it enough. So I think that academia offers, at least from most fields, a lot of throughput of very valid information. So it allows you to stand on the shoulders of giants. If we imagine, you as a warrior, academia can basically give you a really awesome muscular horse that listens to you really well. The horse is armored and he's pissed too, and he's got spikes on his teeth and all this other crazy warhorse shit. And, he's ready to go. He doesn't really know where to go. Your critical thinking is your sharp eyes and your sword to point to the direction of battle. And that the academia doesn't really provide you. That you have to kind of sharpen in your own backyard. So what I got out of my formal education, especially my PhD work with Dr. Mike Stone, was actually learn modern periodization for the first time ever. I had not learned it in any degree program previous to that, nor was it anywhere really to be found on the internet. Right. And once I learned that was the beginning of my oh, holy shit, this is going to make, this is making a lot of sense. And I was lucky enough, I guess, to learn modern periodization early and to be one of the first people to apply it to a few fields, including powerlifting and strength training. The book that I had with a few colleagues, the Scientific Principles of Strength Training, was kind of a first real solid in-depth treatment with modern periodization principles of strength training. And it was, I'm not some kind of fucking mega genius because I wrote that book. It's just nobody else had gotten to it yet. And it was very uncharted territory. And then I did the same thing with hypertrophy, and that was really cool. But, that was me standing on the shoulders of giants. If I hadn't learned modern periodization, and I hadn't for the years prior to that, dude, I was an advocate of high intensity training, like all sets to failure, wacky stuff, that it was just more driven by how I liked to train than how I thought was proper to train. And what I learned at ETSU was such an unbelievably deep grain of knowledge that grain was kind of like a seed. And it basically gave me a foundation upon which to grow my own knowledge and expand it into other fields. And that was a big deal. So that I got out of academia. My first semester at East Tennessee State under Doc Stone was completely transformative.
Wow.
Absolutely. As I just didn't know modern periodization at all. And he was like, oh, the whole thing exists, by the way, and we have all these answers. And I'm like, oh my God, you can apply this to any sport. So that is what I began to do. The concept of fatigue management, I just didn't know existed. I absolutely just didn't know existed up until that point. I had a master's degree in everything. I just didn't know it was real. So, that was a big deal. But the critical thinking part, I think that's more a part that I managed to cultivate on my own. I think I had a knack for, or at least cynical thinking before. And then eventually critical thinking. I will say that if anyone's interested in critical thinking, there is an article that's rather hard to find. You can Google it. It'll pop up in some weird website. But it's called Critical Thinking, What Is It Good For? In Fact, What Is It? That's actually the entire title. I think it's by Howard Gabinesh. And it's from, about 20 years back, but it's maybe the best article on the internet. And it actually describes what critical thinking is in 3 different segments of what critical thinking is, breaks it down, and it gives you examples, and it really teaches you what critical thinking is. And the thing is, critical thinking is really, in a sense, kind of Pandora's box, because critical thinking as a practice, once you uncork it and you point it at something, it's not up to you whether or not you learned things that are nice to know or things that are not so nice to know.
Right.
Like if, for example, you are, say in your early 20s and you're male and you're trying to date and it's maybe you're not so successful at it. You're not sort of getting the dates that you want with the people that you want. If you put a critical thinking light on you as a person and what do you offer the opposite sex in a date, what do you offer in a relationship, you may find an unbelievably helpful plethora of things to change about yourself or to emphasize, de-emphasize. You may also find out like, oh, holy shit, like I'm not nearly as attractive as I thought I was. People, everyone's mom tells them they're handsome. Um, and some moms are exaggerating a bit more than others. And so it's one of those things where if you learn how to critically think, you have to get ready to see some dark sides along with some positive stuff. The positive stuff overall wins out all the time, but there's some darkness in there. And it's one of the reasons they don't teach you critical thinking at schools. They really can't, because if they, in the modern political environment, started to teach you real critical thinking in schools, people would start to apply it to stuff you're not quote unquote supposed to apply it to. And then all of a sudden they'd be like, well, we're not allowed to really endorse what you're saying here. And then you'd say, well, is it wrong? And they'd say, well, truthfully, we can't say that either. And then you would be up shit creek. So I think school's doing a good enough job just telling you what we think is true so far. And critical thinking, at least in 2023, you're going to have to find by yourself. And there's lots of YouTube videos now on how to do critical thinking properly. There's that article that I mentioned. And a lot of it is a personal journey of taking your scientific lens and sort of focusing on various things and seeing what happens.
That was a fantastic answer. And it's even funny you mentioned that article, because I remember after our initial conversation way back, I read that, and then I had a journal entry that I had to do for my class, on critical thinking, and I referenced that article. And that was like a couple of days ago. So,
oh wow,
yeah, I'd really implore people to go check it out. And honestly, I love I love weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting. I love I don't love powerlifting, but I really enjoy programming for powerlifting. I enjoy programming as kind of like this thought experiment. And
yeah.
I think, the way you think about all of this stuff, to me, that's the most interesting piece. It's not like how you came to writing, the books you've written, but it's like the mind behind it, I guess. So having a podcast, as we just recorded, kind of dedicated solely to this like journey through, somewhat short, but this journey through academia and taking what's innate and what's developed and applying that in the field such as our own. I think that's the really cool aspect of it. If people are interested in picking up any of the products that you mentioned, downloading any of the apps, providing monetary support to Renaissance Periodization and yourself, where can they go to find all of that stuff?
Oh, thank you so much. Just YouTube, RP, YouTube, Mike Israetel. You'll find our channel, Renaissance Periodization. If you like some of our videos, just subscribe. And we reference various apps in various videos all the time. And if you just go to the link in the description of pretty much any video, you're going to get a link to the apps. And if you like what you see, you can give it a shot. And if you hate it, please don't come to my house and throw rocks at it. That's happened before. It's quite terrible.
Wow.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, people were upset that anyways, one question right before we end the show would be as someone who loves to think about training, loves to think just generally, I just enjoy thinking, and enjoys creating content off the back end of that. I know a lot of there are probably a good majority of people now who are trying to create content and trying their hand at developing, YouTube channel or writing articles or creating podcasts. What's your advice to doing that effectively for people who are starting out? So imagine, someone who's creates their first YouTube video. They want to be as prolific as you have been. What's some advice you can give them?
Yeah, sure. A couple quick things is one, you should probably be passionate about it or at least really like it. If you create content that you're not into, no one's going to be into listening to you do it. No one's ever going to listen to a presentation they think was done against your will. If you're passionate about something, the way you present it is going to be entirely different. And it's much easier to keep people's attention and to actually invigorate their passion. Like every YouTube video I ever do about a subject, I'm fucking geeked to be there and I can't wait to talk about it. So there's a lot of content you could be putting out. There is a lot of content I could be putting out that I don't because I'm not really sufficiently passionate about it. So almost all the content I'll ever put out is the stuff, the intersecting circles of things I know about and things I'm passionate about. So definitely make sure that you're passionate about whatever it is you want to talk about, Because that way, when you talk about it, more people that tune in are going to be like, yeah, hell yeah, I love this. Versus people are like, dude, is this guy giving like a book report in 6th grade to like a classroom of sleeping children and a teacher who already marked it as an A? And it's like, all right, thanks, Frank, sit down. Thanks. Next, Chelsea, you're up next. She wakes up, drags her book report over, talks about, the Mesoamerican Indians in 1550, like typical school stuff that obviously no one cares. But nobody lost, nobody found. Nobody's listening to anyone speaking. Definitely don't do that, because why am I saying that? A lot of people are like, oh, YouTube and Instagram and content. I got to make content in order to, run my coaching business successfully and get attention for that and make money and be relevant. And that's all absolutely true. But also, like, it's got to be content that you're passionate about. Otherwise, no one cares. You're not going to be able to get people who give a shit to listen to you. Another thing is to write down your ideas when you have them. You don't have a choice as to when you have ideas. Sometimes you'll be falling asleep at night. Sometimes you'll be driving on the freeway. Sometimes you'll be washing dishes and you're like, oh, wow. Oh, holy shit. This would be an awesome piece of content that I could put out. Write it down. My iPhone never leaves my side. It's with me all the time. I just turn on voice notes and I fucking talk, or I just type it in really quick and boom, I have an idea for a video, and those stack up. I have dozens of ideas all the time and they stack up. And then I sit down and I make the PowerPoints for them. And then my last tip is when you're making your outlines. So first of all, make outlines for your videos. Don't just get in front of the camera and start blabbing. Make outlines for them. I like to use PowerPoint. You can use anything you want. There's a software called Workflowy that's incredible. I highly recommend that. I use it too. Once you're making your outlines, make sure that you apply some rigor to what you're thinking about. So if you have an idea to talk about something, think about things like, how can I introduce this topic so that people understand where I'm coming from? How can I look at it from a perspective of costs and benefits? Like if someone's like, hey, like, I want to make a video about how you can save a ton of time training with just compound movements and alternating agonists and antagonists. Make sure to get some time as to, what that is, why that's good, but also what some downsides are. Because you're like, look, if you want to be a pro bodybuilder, you're not going to get there training, push-ups and then pull-ups supersetted. You're just too tired for pull-ups, and that's a problem. You're not going to get the biggest back you can. So you also want to put things in context. At the end of the day, after you've made an outline and you've sort of read through it yourself, you have to ask yourself the question, essentially two questions. One, is this helpful to people? And two, is there anything really missing? Is there any that I fear, in some sense, jokingly, but nonetheless, I do want to put a point on it. I fear multiple YouTube comments of, I wish you had addressed XYZ. And a lot of times it's just, people screaming at the ether, and it's like, yeah, that's nice. I wish I had addressed 1,000 other arbitrary things that came up to your mind related to this topic. You can't cover it all. But if it's a big piece, an important piece, and a piece that after you've already recorded the video and you posted it to TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, whatever, or you made the caption already for Instagram, and you're like, you see that comment that says, hey, I wish you would have covered this. And you're like, oh, God damn it. That's what I fucking missed. Make sure you think your stuff through. Try to get a little bit more of a complete approach. If you do all those things, then, you just put content out. One last thing, sorry to get ranty, but I would never put too much stock into feeling the compulsion to have to make mandatory content. If, I would say all the content you make, you should feel pretty good about. And if you go a few days without making any content because you're uninspired, no worries. I wouldn't make any content. They're like, well, I got to put out a video every Monday. And well, I made this video and it's going to suck because I hate talking about this. I have nothing to say about it. There's nothing novel about it. I'm just droning on. But every Monday I told myself I got to put out a piece of content. It's cool to have minimum content requirements for yourself, like 3 videos a week. Make sure you're generative enough to at least make a few more ideas than that extra per week so that you can stack up the ideas and never run out. So if you have a few weeks where you're feeling uninspired to make new stuff, you already have great ideas from before that you're making. I just wouldn't, you can't cram it in. It's kind of like, I'll make a terrible analogy before we get going here. It's if you're with your significant other and you're about to have some adult time together, you can't force it. If you force it in the sense of like, well, all right, honey, this is what you wanted. I'm all smiles. I'm in bed. What do you want now? It's like, oh my God, it's not how this is supposed to work. Everyone's supposed to love this. So same goes for content. If you love your content and you're really excited about it, everyone else will be much more likely to be as well. So don't ever say to yourself, I have to make content, and then half of it ends up sucking. I know people, I follow YouTubers, I'm subscribed to them in one of my fields of just leisure that I just consume for entertainment, which is like military technology and strategy. I have a couple of YouTubers I follow. I watch every single video they put out. They only put out a video a week. And some weeks they don't even put out a video. I follow them every video they have because every video they have is pretty much amazing, but they don't have a video every day. They don't have a blog post every day. And that's okay because I know from them I get quality. If you think about the alternative, imagine that they put out, uh, let's say 2 videos a week and every other video sucked. I might not even be subscribing to them because I'm like, yeah, this guy's got great stuff, but a lot of it sucks. Fuck that. I don't need that on my feed. So whatever it is you do, make sure that you're sticking to quality and making sure that you really like what you're putting out, because nobody wants just you putting out, in quotes, general content. There's enough AI putting that out anyway.
No, I think that was incredibly comprehensive and great insight for people who are looking to kind of get into that space. Right before I take us out, what are you currently interested in, or what if you have any books you're reading, or any source of information that you're kind of locked into nowadays?
In the
what are
in the
those?
field or just in general?
No, just in general.
The developments we are currently seeing with AI, specifically on top of the transformer architecture, giving birth to large language models and their exponential rise in ability, is going to be the greatest thing that's ever happened to the world, and it's happening right now. So I think that people who are not paying attention to this are missing out on something completely insane. This is going to be a bigger deal than the internet, and the internet is the biggest deal ever. So like, imagine if 1997 was around and someone was like, hey, you should check out Google, and you're like, meh, you know, eh. It would be a curious thing
Right.
to do. And so I think right now, anyone who wants to get up to speed on what AI is doing, what it's going to be doing soon. Another thing you can Google is universal robotics. Robots are coming very soon. The technologies to have efficient functioning robots are pretty much either here or inevitable very soon. That kind of stuff keeps me awake at night all the time. And we're at the precipice of something very, very insane. We're at the precipice of computers being substantially smarter than all of us put together, which is literally, figuratively, as close to literally as possible, drinking from the well of wisdom is happening like kind of right now, and is going to be happening big in the next few years. So I would encourage everyone to at least familiarize yourself with what a GPT is and why it's important.
Wow, what a way to take us out. Dr. Mike, it's always an honor. More so just to hear someone like yourself kind of talk through different concepts and problems. Always find that fascinating. And it makes me think about how I do that. So when you talk about creating content, I'm like, wow, I don't nearly apply as much rigor as I could. So that's always insightful. If for everyone who's listening, yeah, go check out Renaissance Periodization, check out their YouTube channel. Also, I would, I'm kind of developing an interest now in what you just mentioned as far as the kind of AI revolution goes. So I'd implore people to check that out as well. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can go to, you can find me at Josh_Phil, WL, that's PHILWL. It's philosophical weightlifting everywhere else. And until next time, we'll catch you guys on another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting.